For many of you who know me, I jumped out of water and NRM about 2 years ago and into the pig industry, which was a great change for me. But really listening to the three presentations, I've been quite intrigued. If you looked at the old Murray-Darling Basin Commission website, 15 years ago, they had identified their 6 issues around environmental health of the basin, and only one of those was related to water. So I'm sitting here and I'm quite amused seeing the discussion over the last 15 years, 10 or 15 years in particular, and we've gone from integrated catchment management to a basin plan that's focused purely on water, and now it seems like all three speakers have been talking about that holistic land management again. So I'm just wondering, where to next? We've been to integrated catchment management, water, and we look like we're going back there again. Is that the right approach? Any or all three can take that one.
What do you reckon?
Yes, I hope so. It was a big step in the wrong direction to move away from that integrated catchment management. It happened because there was, in some respects, a major response or reaction to the Millennium Drought, which all focused on water and other of those important things. And I think all three of us said, it's not just about water. There are lots of other complementary management, works and measures things that really matter, and they've been left off the agenda. That's a shame. They should be funded. The less funded they are, the more important they become. And some of those big programs like land care, caring for our country, the biodiversity fund, and so on, they've been whittled away. They've been eroded at a Commonwealth and also at a state level, and that's a real shame, and that should turn around.
Colin or Gavin, is the focus too narrow?
Oh no, I was just trying to get it straight in my mind. I suppose the Basin Plan observed that there was a core fundamental issue with the level of diversions in the system, and we I think all three of us agree, but we might disagree in terms of how big that adjustment might need to be. I think that's the message from Gavin's address. But so that had to be done. So it was a necessary change. Is it sufficient? No, I made it clear myself. I think we could get better outcomes again if we had a look at those complementary outcomes. One of the things that's come up in the Northern Review is whether those NRM outcomes could replace an adjustment to the water sharing, the way water is shared within the basin. I don't think that's the case. I think you do fundamentally need the right hydrological regime to support a healthy environment, but you can get far better outcomes if you complement that then with other NRM actions. So that's been a debate we've been having in the Northern Basin with some of our northern communities. This is one that we kind of make the point, but we kind of, when we discuss it with communities, we tend to agree to disagree. They see the emphasis is slightly different, but that's my view.
How are we going? Yes, we've got 2 questions. Where's the other?
Thanks. It's Jack Holden. I work for Fonterra, the dairy processing company. We process about 20% of Australia's milk, and about a quarter of that is in the Murray-Darling Basin area. And technically, we see great opportunities for growth in that part of the world for our business and businesses like us. But I think the big constraint we're suffering from at the moment is farmer and community confidence, or lack thereof. And the water reform process and the fatigue that's come from that has been quite damaging in terms of investor confidence to invest and confidence to live and work and invest in these industries in that area. I think over the time, I've got a question for you in a minute, Colin, but over that period I think we've overestimated the adaptive capacity of these communities and underestimated the social and economic impacts of what we thought would happen with the plan as it rolls out. And now we have an opportunity to perhaps maybe pause to take better stock of that. I'm very interested in what your metrics are for assessing what adverse looks like when you assess the 450 gigalitres of upwater. So what does adverse social economics impacts really look like? How will you assess that before you make decisions around the extra 450 gig diversion out of the system? Because that's a very key question, and it pushes very deeply into the confidence piece that really is what underpins the agricultural success story that we'd otherwise be having there.
All Just before I answer the one about the metrics, I do want to address the pause question as well. It's funny because there was almost an inherent contradiction within your comments that communities are after confidence and certainty, and yet they're also asking for a pause and I think an extension of the addition of further uncertainty. I don't see that it's right that we pause the plan. This is a very contentious subject. It's been widely discussed, but quite frankly, I don't know what it means. I don't think it would create the certainty that communities are looking for. I don't think it would be wise to kind of put a kink in the hose that's actually driving more than $2 million a day worth of infrastructure investments into the irrigation sector in the basin. And I don't think it'd be wise to pause on the work that we have to do where we can actually make some adjustments to the basin plan through the adjustment mechanism and also the Northern Review, because both of those things can give better social and economic outcomes. So I just thought I might use that opportunity to make some comments on that. You can tell I'm pretty passionate. With regards to the metrics, basin governments, when they struck the arrangements around the SDL adjustment mechanism, they thought long and hard about how to do both the measurement of what would constitute no adverse social and economic impacts, as well as how would they apply this notion of environmental equivalence. So, how do you measure one basket of environmental outcomes and deem it to be equivalent to another basket of different set of outcomes? So when the basin plan was settled, there was a lot of time and effort that went into the fundamentals around the environmental equivalence test, but in the efficiency measures context, it was agreed between basin governments that they would come forward with proposals and it would be up to the proponent to demonstrate how that proposal had no adverse social and economic impacts. So it's that responsibility and the metrics will be a choice that's left for the states, basin states, and also the Commonwealth Government, I guess, as they roll out the efficiency measures program. The metrics aren't prescribed anywhere near as much as they are in terms of the environmental equivalence test.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments on that. Particularly when you talk about a pause for the plan, if you see where the plan is, the plan's nearly there. And in fact, in some states, it's already there. So South Australia, the recovery's actually occurred. And so when people say you're going to pause, the question we keep asking is, what's that actually mean? And I think when you drill down, people aren't really sure as to what that means. But I think if the SDL adjustment mechanism comes through as we see, and so it's 500 gigalitres, the requirement for recovery is really small compared to the overall thing. The 450 gigs of upwater is a really important issue, and if you think about it, it rolls off your tongue real easy, doesn't it? 450. So 450 is a cup of coffee. 450 could be 4,500, might be a council rates depending where you live. But 450 gigalitres of water is massive, and I think after the significant contributions that have been made back to the environment, that 450 is going to hurt hard. All the easy gains have been and gone. So where do you actually get it from? The only place it comes from is out of the consumptive pool, and it will be out of the useful consumptive pool. We've made a lot of the efficiency gains. In fact, I can't think of too many in our own state, and we've been talking to them recently about where's the extra water. It will come from productive capacity. So for us, that's actually the biggest issue as we move forward. It's not actually completing the plan. The plan, the 2750 is almost there. That upward is very significant. And I'll talk about expansion because it's interesting. I live in the middle of an almond area, and they are going gangbusters and expanding as well. But the reality is the pool of water shrunk. So any expansion means it's going to be contraction somewhere else. And the issues for all of us that sit in a basin are who's actually going to, if you're going to expand, somebody's going to lose, and who's actually in that place.
And I think that notion that is interesting about someone else expands so someone else contract, that are winners and losers, that's business, that's how it works. And being able to tease out, as I think we've said, some of the cause and effect of what's happening within those communities, it's not easy. I had a good conversation with Claire Miller the other week about dairy and some of those apparently conflicting things going on within communities. What I see when I live in Melbourne is Peckham Valley investing $45 million in a new UHT processing plant with an $18 million planned expansion. Jerry Harvey's just spent $80 million on a property. Golden Murray floated on the ASX with a capital value of $500 million. Those sorts of things, that speaks to me of investor confidence. Investors are confident in the area, in the industry. That's why they're putting their money there. If they didn't have any confidence, they wouldn't be investing. I get incensed and really confused by hearing statements by the likes of Sharman Stone screaming that the dairy industry is on its knees. That's not what it looks like to me. It's challenged. There's a drought. You know, of course they're under pressure. There's a drought. You can't expect an industry that relies on water not to be under pressure when there's a drought. But that's different from being on its knees, lack of confidence, dying communities, all those sorts of things. So I'm not for a second trying to say I don't recognise a lot of people under a lot of pressure and communities, you know, suffering. But I'm interested in teasing out those cause and effect things first before we point the finger at a bunch of bureaucrats and greenies and other people, you know, too many big bureaucracy, all that stuff. It makes it easy to point the finger at and say that's what caused it, when I'm not sure that that's often the case.
Okay.
Come on. Okay, Christine Kershaw from National Farmers Federation. I just want to take up, I'm very uncomfortable with the terminology pause the plan. What we're really talking about here is due diligence in the planning process and having enough time to do that properly, so that we've got very clearly through this inquiry, which by the way I don't think is a waste of time at all. It's part of the adaptive management process where we take a breath and we take a look at what some of those impacts are, because these are people that are suffering some of these impacts, not just the environment. But what we're talking about here is the next phase of this plan, which is probably the most important phase, and making sure that we minimise the impacts on not just farmers but those communities and maximise the impacts on the environment. So we take that time to look at the evidence, to listen to people so that they're engaged, to bring them along on the process, which hasn't happened to date as well as it could. It's due diligence. That's what we're looking for. It's not pausing the activities of the plan. It's not pausing the environmental watering necessarily, but you're heading into a period now where you're moving huge amounts of water over very dry, undulating land at the say-so of a computer model. Now, you have to have the time and confidence when that water's released to minimise the impacts that are avoidable. If they're avoidable, then they need to be avoided, because otherwise there's going to be hell to pay. If there's water being released over farms that are productive, then there's no way that we're going to stand by quietly and let that happen. That is unacceptable. And if that's a case for taking a little bit more time, Colin, you seem very rushed in the amount of work you have to do. Every public servant I talk to is feeling very rushed at the moment in this planning process. So why not just elongate that to make sure we make a proper job of it? That's what we mean by pausing the plan.
Can I make a couple of comments on that?
Yes.
You have a question in that, just so that you have something to work off. And that is, what measures are going to be taken now to ensure that we're not flooding farms unnecessarily, that we're not putting businesses out of business unnecessarily, and then we're not, every ounce of water that we take out of that system is coming out of the pocket of a farmer. So how are we making sure that we minimise that the best we can? What's going to be different in this next phase of implementation that has been before?
Okay, I was actually going to comment on the environmental watering and assertions that it's flooding. Right now, look, if I can use the opportunity to talk about a slightly broader concept, Christine, it's the environmental water holder right now doesn't have a lot of water. Why? Because they get the same allocations that all the other entitlement holders get, and there's not a lot in storage. They don't have a lot. They're going. When we do our annual watering priorities for the environment, we actually recognise the resource availability scenario that we're going to operate in, and right now we're in a very low to medium scenario. At least we were at the beginning of the year, and it's probably more low now. When you get low scenario, you have to be very, very careful with the water you got. Just like in irrigation business, every drop's crucial. You've got to maximise the outcome, and it's not in those times. That's not when you do your extensive kind of broad scale, long duration inundation events. It's when you actually try and use some of those environmental works to build some resilience in little pockets of your ecosystem so that it bounces back. When it comes to this notion of flooding, that's not what environmental watering's about. Environmental watering is putting kind of additional water out into the kind of the flood runners and the very low parts of the floodplain. It's not putting it up to the levees, even to the top of the levees. I think it's this general misconception. And when we had the big 2010 flows in through the Goulburn Valley, there was all these assertions, see, this is what environmental watering will do year in, year out. I can tell you they don't have enough water to do that. When you put an environmental water flow down there, it's actually just hitting the flood runners and the very, very low parts of the floodplain right adjacent to the river. It's not watering that will affect houses. It's not watering that will affect kind of built infrastructure. But it does affect landholders, potentially. So the whole... now I'm getting back to your question. The question was, what are you going to do about it, which is actually the sensible thing to ask. The whole constraints management program is about understanding, righto, if we wanted to relax constraints, what do we have to do to ameliorate all those landholder impacts? And it might be some things like just providing better access over a causeway or something like that. And then, if those things are done, we will relax constraints. But governments aren't doing it the other way around. They're not saying, right, let's charge on, relax constraints, and then we'll worry about the impacts later. It's actually the other way around. They're most concerned about first figuring out, can we ameliorate all the third-party effects from higher river flows? And they're not, bankers up to the top of your levee. It's actually just slightly greater flows down your flood runners and creeks. And if we can ameliorate them, that'll determine how we can relax constraints. Because right now, the environmental water holders can't flood people's property. There's a natural safeguard there because the river operators won't let them. The river operators don't have the rights to release water to flood properties. So when the environmental water holder, if he did make an inadvertent order and say, give me that because I want to take it there and it was going to affect somebody, the river operator simply wouldn't do it. Whether they're a Victorian river operator or MDBA on behalf of the basin governments through the Murray or the New South Wales operator in the Murrumbidgee. So the key thing we're doing about the constraints is actually the state government's actually looking to see what could be done to ameliorate all those impacts so you can relax the constraints and get greater flexibility. So that'd be the way I'd answer that one. The other one was about the businesses and what can be done about that. I'll come back to it. The single biggest task we've got, I think, in the next 12 months, and that is get those SDL adjustment projects in, figure out how much we can amend the SDL, and make it happen. Because that, like I said, if you have a look at that, remember that yellow wedge? You can get rid of almost all of it if you get a good outcome. If you get Gavin's 650 aspiration, then you are very, very close to getting rid of all of it. So, yeah, and look, I will say that basin governments are now starting to feel the pressure of that looming deadline as well, and there's active discussions going on about, well, hang on, how can we make decisions in the middle of 16 but still leave a bit of freedom to make sure we implement those projects in the way they should be implemented in the longer term? So it's happening, yeah. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
How are we going, Claire?
Claire Miller from Dairy Australia. Since I was named, I thought I'd better put my hand up. Sorry, firstly, Colin, I'll just pick you up on 793 still to go, and most of that we can get rid of with the 650 gigalitres, but then if you do the 450 up water, we're back pretty much almost where we started with 200. Well, won't go into technicalities, so
Yeah.
it's not just a downward thing, it's also an upward one. It was a great conversation that Arlene and I had. But just to fill in the other side of it, the dairy industry in the Murray Dairy region, which covers southern New South Wales and northern Victoria, is not on its knees, but it is under significant pressure. And a lot of that pressure is to do with drought and to do with commodity prices and lots of other things that are happening. But there is also an edge to it that is the basin plan. And you only need to look at milk production. So it's all very well that Jerry Harvey's spending however much he's spending on a property up there, but he hasn't actually put any cows on it yet, and we don't think he's got any water yet. So the extent to which he's going to be able to run that property as a profitable dairy farm is still in question. Murray-Goulburn floating on the stock market. It's a national company. They float on the stock market on the basis of what's going on in the dairy industry across 4 different states, not what's going on in the Basin Plan. That wasn't where the confidence came from. With the pressure on the industry, just some stats. Before the drought hit with the low allocations, milk production in that Murray Dairy region was sitting at around 2,800 megalitres a year. It got down to 1870 at the very worst of the drought, indisputably because of the low allocations. It's recovered back up to 2,300, but it's not getting any higher. It seems to be levelling out at that level, and that is the water constraint, because everything else is pretty much equal. We've got the normal situation, fluctuating commodity prices, fluctuating milk prices, all the usual things that go on in the industry. The one thing that is different is water availability. And the very conservative estimate, we know that our dairy farmers sold at least 120 gigalitres to the environment during the buybacks. So they're reliant on the temporary market if they're still in business. We also recognise that a lot of them are only still in business because they got that cash flow at the time through the buybacks, but it does have a legacy effect in terms of milk production. And what we're really sort of struggling with at the moment is we may never get back to where we were before the drought in terms of milk production. So what does a profitable and productive industry look like that's 500 megalitres less than where we were 10 years ago? Thank you.
I might take Tony Jones' option and take that as a comment unless anyone wants to particularly respond. I know we've got
I'm sure there was a question for you there.
Go on. No?
Thanks, Arlene. Throw me under the bus.
No.
Goodness gracious.
Snow Barlow, University of Melbourne. I want to just probe about where you see the environmental water holder going here, both from the point of view of your plans, Colin, your aspirations, Arlene, and Gavin's sort of practical suggestions. You've stated, Arlene, that you've got reservations. Presumably that's sale of permanent water by the, or is it temporary water, that temporary trading? But secondly, Colin, how do you see the efficiency with which the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, as they learn, as they get more experience in the system, how the efficiencies might improve in terms of the impact of environmental water? And I suppose the really tough one is, do you at any point in the future see that there might be co-benefits both in consumptive and environmental water investment in particular areas to improve environmental and actually productive outcomes?
Good questions. Good questions. I'll try and answer them in reverse because I'm going to forget I've written down the first one, I'll forget the second one if I don't answer it first. Yeah, look, I think there is some opportunities for co-benefit from environmental watering and delivery to users. I'm principally thinking about constraints where not only would that give you greater flexibility in terms of delivering environmental events down the river, but it might actually ease some of the river management constraints that we have in terms of providing reliable supply to holding the water in the right parts of the basin so that you can deliver to entitlement holders when they need it. So currently we do intervalley transfers, we do transfers down to Lake Victoria to make sure we got water on demand there for South Australia. If you had constraints relaxed and we had maybe the reduced need to use that storage, maybe we can hold it back up in Hume where it's more efficient. And you can then do your normal irrigation deliveries and environmental watering at the same time without having to worry about congested river conveyance constraints or something like that. I'm not a real expert though in the river, so I'll temper those comments with there should be a discussion probably we should collectively have with David Dreverman, who knows that river inside and out in terms of how you manage it. So I won't rule out that there are opportunities to do it together. So in terms of the question then about how do we get environmental watering more efficient, I actually think it goes much down the same path. Environmental watering isn't done on an empty river. It never is, okay? With the volumes of water we have, you can't make releases, you don't have enough water to make releases to make a flow event in its own right. You have to build on either one, natural cues, or two, piggyback on the irrigation deliveries that are going down the river. So the Barmer forest watering that we've got going this year, it was actually built just on the expectation that we'd be pretty much running the river flat chat to get the water down to our downstream irrigators, and that's at around 10,000 megalitres a day. What we asked for was, through the Living Murray exercise, was could you just increase releases just a little bit to bring that up to about 15,000 megalitres a day, and that then let us inundate the Millawa side of the Barmah-Millawa forest. So how do we get it more efficient? I think by integrating river operations with environmental water delivery, that would be a good first step. I think there is a need for better knowledge about how you construct these flow events in a way which actually provide the right ecological cues to get the right fish spawning, to make sure you can get it at the right time of year, so it's the right temperature, the right height, the right length, and crucially, see if you can do it to advantage native fish species more so than the carp. So it's those kind of learnings that I think will come through time. Look, the Chew's not the first fellow on the block. New South Wales government has had a lot more experience in environmental watering than the Commonwealth has. So I think it's putting their heads together to figure out how to actually deliver that stuff to get the best benefit.
Arlene, I think there was a question to you there about trading of environmental water entitlements, whether it related to temporary and permanent, or?
Well, we support the Chew being able to trade. The Chew and any other water holder should be able to use the market to their benefits, to buy and sell, to meet their needs, and assist other people meeting their needs. But as I tried to express in my presentation, I also think that the recommendation to change Section 106 of the Act as it stands to enable the Chew to sell water for other environmental water, or buy more environmental water somewhere else, at face value it looks really sensible. If there's an area that really needs a fish ladder and it doesn't have a fish ladder, and a fish ladder would do more good in that area than more water, why wouldn't they do it? It's common sense, and at face value there's nothing wrong with that recommendation. And if everyone played really nicely in the sandpit with each other, and we could be confident of that, then we would support that amendment. But it's just the thin edge of the wedge. There are precedents for it in other places. As I say, one day it's a fish ladder, the next day it's being expected to sell water to pay for your delivery charges. That's not what that water is meant to be there for. There isn't enough there. The environmental water, which is set aside by the plan, is for use as water, not to be sold, to be used for other things. So that's our worry, is that it's a thin edge of the wedge. And also, a call from the Nationals Party conference really was to support that Section 106, but they made it very clear that they wanted that change so that the Chew would sell water to irrigators. And the way it was worded, it was very much sort of, well, that's not, sell water to irrigators to get environmental benefit. That was sell water to irrigators because irrigators want water. And I'm just conscious of backwards sliding and the Chew being under unreasonable influence or forced to make decisions which are not in the environment's best interests. So we support the Chew's trading. The activities that have happened so far have been great, mutual benefit, all the rest of it. We hope the Chew continues to trade, but I'm worried about that thin edge of the wedge, about loosening up that ability so that the benefits of trade are not used directly for the environment.